Everybody wants to regulate and control it, and it never works. But I have some really fun stuff today, because I have some of my favorite words, and your favorite words too. Can't help it. Telos. Like I told you, I'm not teaching the declensions of the verbs, but that's okay. Telos. The problem with telos, and that's what we'll see, we've seen it just recently. Everybody wants to translate it. Let's see, I've got it, the list there. Continual, custom, end, ending, finally, uttermost. But guess what? It doesn't mean anything like that. A telos is a vanishing point on the horizon. And it specifically means it's literally, in our verbiage, a telos is a limit. You guys remember all that stuff that you had when you were in math or calculus or whatever, right? Here's the Greeks using a word that we would hate, right? Because we hate math in our culture, which really blows me away, because math is what makes the world go round, literally, in science and everything else. But we are anti-teaching our children, and plus we don't even teach them math anymore. I'm not sure what we teach them. It's new math, new this, new that, but it's not math. But in any case, the word telos to the Greeks was to them an obvious thing, which is the limit. A limit, right? How they draw a limit? Oh, they kind of drew it like this, right? Do you remember? The limit, and that means an infinite limit, or you'd have a limit that was 0, or a limit that was 1. You might remember that terminology or symbology, right? You ever wonder why I write a logos to a telos? I've absconded with the Greek, or not with the Greek, but with the limit structure, the way we supposedly show things. I mean, I think that's kind of fun. But the point is, the Greeks were way into this, and their language expressed this. That's why their language is so concrete. If math isn't concrete, what happens?
Things fall apart.
Yeah, 2 and 2 can be 5, or what? Yeah.
Buildings fall down.
Buildings do fall down. As a matter of fact,
if you didn't have math, right?
Well, buildings fall down because buildings fall down in the modern era, right? But that's absolutely true. The reason buildings fall down is generally because of mathematical errors or problems.
Well, can't you say that math is an expression of logic?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If the numbers, if it doesn't work, it has to be logical. There's no multiple answers.
As a matter of fact,
if you're working with something that's multiple answers, then you lose your logic and it won't work.
You hear what he said. I want to express this because this is one of the most important things of the whole world. Remember, we have 3 ways to know truth, right? You have the scientific method, the legal historical method, right? And you have logic. The problem is, can math be proven with the scientific method? No, it can't. It can't. The scientific method only works on repeatable events. Math is not a repeatable real-world event. Never in the real world does 2 and 2 equal 4, because set theory, you can define the set theory to fit, but remember, for example, in using the scientific method, when I drop the ball, every time I drop the ball, do I get the same answer? No, the answer is different, and I have to use basically mathematics to correct for the errors, or not errors, but the irregularities, the variable in the system. So the scientific method and math do not fit. What fits is, and the Greeks learned this very early, I have to have logic because math is logic. All math is logic. The historical method is used to prove historical events that aren't repeatable. So math fits in that category, which is, you are exactly and precisely correct. Math equals logic. And if you wonder why the New Testament, What do they always tell us? I'm going to logos you. I'm going to give you a logical argument. Logos is the basis for the word logic in English. The Greeks didn't have a word for logic. Why? That was the basis for their entire culture and society. You know, you don't need a word for something that expresses your entire background of existence. And they were based in mathematics, but not algebraic mathematics. That was an invention, by the way, of the Arabs, the Arabic cultures, which we took, and basically that significantly improved our mathematics. It's really cool how different cultures move into these things. Here, this other word, but to telos.
Lionel, before you take off on
The
this
next-
particular path,
Yeah.
I agree with part of your premise, but please explain to me why their entire God system was logical.
Oh no, I won't say that. That's not true.
Then perhaps I misunderstood you. You told me that
Their culture and their language is all based in logic. But you are, and by the way, all right, if you look at their mythos, their mythical structure, you're right. We would say their mythical structure is
illogical.
illogical from our standpoint.
So
However, if you look at it this way, if we look on a timeline, when did they develop their mythical structure? Well, that's way early when they were animists, right? Animists. And they didn't understand the world. And so they were trying to understand the world. So they put it together. Now, I'll tell you this. Why don't we study Hindu myth? Why don't we study Egyptian myth? Why don't we study Nordic myth? You know why? Because Greek is the most logical of all the mythic structures. If you look at the Nordic myth, if you look at the Nordic myth, okay, the Nordic myth, completely irrational. Ragnarok is going to happen, or did it happen, or are we going toward Ragnarok? I mean, why would you even have, why would that even be a cultural expression, right? The fact that you have a culture that's going toward destruction, right? You know what I'm saying?
Isn't that the second law of thermodynamics?
Maybe the second law of thermodynamics.
Everything tends toward disorder.
I mean, we just named a couple cultures. Isn't every culture heading towards destruction?
The Christian culture says that the earth, matter of fact, according to Christian culture, the earth and heaven today, right now, is together, right? And at some point, there will be no more earth. But guess what? What's the big point at the end? Is it the end of everything? No. It's a very positive message. Because the negative message is for those who are not convinced. But for those who are convinced, it's really positive. Ragnarok, what happens to everybody? Gods, worlds, everyone's like, that's the end, right? Or how about Egyptian culture? The Egyptian culture, talk about irrational, that a guy lost his body part, and therefore the whole of creation is based on the fact this guy lost a body part, and therefore we are all going to die in death, and then there's like something in the afterworld. But the afterworld is not a very positive or nice place. I mean, it's really kind of ugly. It's like, you want to be like living like that, like a mummy? I mean, literally, that's their perception of the world. And nothing is complete in the world until they find his body part, right? And you look at Hindu myth. Oh, Hindu myth, you know, a lot is written in the Bhagavad Gitas. But the most horrific thing about the Bhagavad Gitas is, for example, the most classical one, the one of, what's his name, Vishnu. Vishnu, who tells the young man is fighting his brothers and his uncles and his family. He's going to war against them. And Vishnu is his chariot driver. And Vishnu tells him that it's okay for him to kill and destroy his family members and his uncles and everyone, not because it's the will of the gods, but because it's fate. It's going back to that fate message. It's fated, and therefore you have to do it, and therefore don't feel guilty and don't feel bad about it. And guess what? They're going to be reincarnated anyway, so you're helping, right? I'm like, dudes, this is not happy. And how about, the Greeks? One of the reasons the Greeks eventually came to Christianity so much is because, boy, that Christian worldview of hope. Yeah, give me a little of that, right? There's hope now, and there's hope later. Where, most of the worldviews of, the mythos cycles is there's no hope for the gods. In Hindu, what happens to the gods? Gods don't reincarnate. When you're a god, you're stuck. You're stuck forever. And the big deal about being reincarnated is eventually you can achieve nirvana, right? You can achieve basically nirvana. Guess what nirvana is?
Nothing.
Nothing. You no heaven, no happiness, no goodness, no productivity. You're just nothing. I'm like, well, I'm going for nothing. I'm bound for the nothing land, right? I'm bound for the nothing land. Dude, this is really neat, right? Not happy. Buddhism, the same thing. Buddhism, how about Taoism? The best thing you can hope for in Taoism is you end up as ashes in somebody's house, and they might give you some... Venerate you, yeah, but you're like, not there, I guess. I'm just saying, when you look at the reasoning, the reasoning in the mythos cycle of the Greeks, it comes from very early in their culture, and they would say, well, we're trying to logically understand. And what they did with their logic, it did. Because what did they eventually gain? Yeah, I'm saying zero culture, zero time. I don't know when that is. That's probably maybe 7 to 10,000. Okay, 7,000 makes those that are young Earth creationists really happier. For some reason, I don't know why, because the dates are really amorphous anyway. But 7 to 10,000 years, the beginning of their animist culture. Eventually, we know around 500 BC. 500 BC, we start to get the legal historical, the historical method. And then around 300 BC or so, we start to see the scientific method. And we know that logic somewhere reared itself in that time period. We don't know exactly when, but it was very prominent in about this time. So, yeah, I'm just saying, yeah, if you, and you know what we don't do? What do they teach you in which is really good? What do they teach you in school? What mythos cycle?
Greek and Roman.
The Greek and Roman, and basically most of the Greeks. You don't get much Roman cycle because Roman cycle, look, the Romans just stole from the Greeks, and the Romans are a little bit whacked out anyway. I mean, they have some really, if you ever hear their mythos, you go, wow, that's weird. But anyway, and they knew it. That's why they stole the Greeks, right? They didn't steal the Hindus. They didn't steal the Egyptians. They didn't steal the, matter of fact, the minute they could, okay, until who did you never ever hear about Gamadevarum or Ragnarok? Until who wrote about it? Wagner. Wagner, for Hitler, finally drug it up out of the bowels of, ancient history, because what did the rest of the European world do? Why did you study Greek? Why did you study Greek myth? Why did you study Bible? Because you had to. No. Where's Jan when I need her? Jan will tell us the answer. It's because 99.9% of all literature, classical literature, includes references to Greek, to Roman, and to Bible. Every bit of it is full of it. So the reason they taught you was not to hurt or intimidate you, but so you could understand the literature. And guess what? Nobody wrote about. Very few people wrote about the Norse myth or the German myths or the Celtic myths. All those depressing, horrific. Fate is better than being. Look, fate is better than being skinned and gutted. Just saying. And if you read that stuff, it's skinning and gutting. Okay. So yes, sir.
When the Greeks, in their logos to tell us, and they would get together and they would discuss in various topics. They didn't discuss religion though. They couldn't talk about the gods in a logical manner.
Oh,
It wasn't.
They
That's
did.
why Socrates was.
No. About three of Socrates' if you read my book, The Second Mission, about three of Socrates' the last 5 dialogues of Socrates are all about God. They had huge logical arguments about the gods and about the status of the world and about what the world was made of. You know, atoms, like the reason we have atomic theory or had even atomic theory as a concept, the word atom comes from atoms, comes from the Greek, and it means the smallest particle, particulate matter. And the Greeks discovered this logically, through logical reasoning. And everything was to prove the gods. See, what we miss is this. What was all of philosophy about?
Proving the existence of God.
All of philosophy was about proving the existence of God until Immanuel Kant proved that God absolutely exists. After Immanuel Kant, and you no wonder, Immanuel Kant is hated. He is literally hated by the agnostics and the atheists and modern philosophers, because he took away the only purpose in philosophy. The purpose, what happened to theology? Theology broke away from philosophy. Why? Christians believed that proof of God was in nature. It's called natural theology. Because natural theology exists, the Christians subsumed, even though philosophy, the purpose of philosophy was to prove that God exists. That was the purpose through all the ages of philosophy, among other things, but the purpose of philosophy was to prove the existence of God. Once in theology, Christians invented theology because they assumed God was seen in nature. It was a natural thing that was inseparable from nature. So they created theology not to prove God, but rather to
Learn things about him.
yeah, to understand God. That is exactly correct. So what theology did is it took the logical reasoning from philosophy and applied it. So in the beginning of this, in the beginning of logic, all is philosophia, to try to understand those things which men can know. So you have philosophy, and then later on, under Christianity, Christianity is what caused theology. And everyone, by the way, remember, it was a separation around, I have to look back at my notes, but the 1800s is when we had PhDs and THDs. I am a PhD, a doctor of philosophy. A THD is a doctor of theology. And so we separated those out because philosophy studied the world. It was always assumed under the idea we're ultimately proving the existence of God. Even Newton, in developing calculus and in developing the theories of gravity, Newton believed he was proving God. Because if you find order in the universe, what are you doing?
Finding a higher power
You're-
that made it.
Yeah. Matter of fact, Martin Luther, in case you forget, Martin Luther, natural theology, natural theology is it. That is the theology that we all are supposed to stand under. Natural theology. It's a presumption of the existence of God, and it's a presumption, for example, in the New Testament, the documents, it's a presumption, the historical nature of the Old Testament, New Testament documents. Everybody else who doesn't do that has strayed big time. And I haven't taught theology. Theology is really cool if you ever get into actual theology, or especially the theological schools in the modern era. I won't go into that. Anyway, sorry. This is really good stuff because this is the foundation of education that we are missing right in the modern era. Sad. Anyway, let's see. ELPI, and I know it has a D, but that's because this is a word that I think you were looking at, or maybe it was you were looking at, elpis. Elpis. Elpis is usually translated, you see I got it right there, elpis is usually translated faith or hope. But what it means, it does not mean faith or hope in the sense that we have. It is expectation. Expectation or confidence. So it is not like you hear it all the time, right? In the boardroom. I hope we meet our goals. I hope we do this. I hope we do that. That is purely English. If I say elpis, it means not hope, but rather I have a full expectation of it occurring. You know, and if you think about this very sincerely, please do. Think about this. If you were in a Greek meeting, and a Greek, you know, ancient Greek meeting, and you expressed, oh, I hope this happens. Oh, I hope I get that, right? What do you think the Greeks would do?
Assume that's what's going to happen.
Well, no, I mean, if you said it in the English sense, right?
They'd roll their eyes at you.
Yeah, they'd roll their eyes and they might slap you. Because they'd say, what? What do you mean? We have elpis. Elpis is not, remember when Paul writes about the hope I have? He's not talking about, you know, I've heard 1,000 sermons about how the hope of Paul, oh, we hope to have Jesus, right? When Paul said elpis, what did he say?
Definitely.
I have the confident expectation, more like what you read in Narnia. Remember in Narnia when Piggy Wiggle, what's his name? Peggy Wiggle said, we have an expectation that we will be with Jesus Christ. And even if it doesn't come true, this is what he said, even if it doesn't come true, it's the hope of the English, the hope of the Germans, the hope of the Nordic, Ragnarok, right? Even if it doesn't come true, I am a better person for holding that through my whole life in that expectation. Remember that? That's Pascal's argument, by the way. That's an expression of Pascal's argument for children. Yes, sir.
That kind of dovetails nice with the word pistis and faith. In our contemporary culture, we think of faith as, well, I've taken somebody's word that this is true, so it'll probably happen because I believe it's true. But the Greek pistis doesn't mean that at all. It means I've been convinced by all the evidence I've ever seen that this is true, so I fully expect this will happen because that's where all the evidence is pointing.
Precisely. And if you notice where our schools and universities are going, we used to have schools and universities based in Greek logic and reasoning, right? They took the Greek logic and then they applied it with Roman principle. And today we're going back to the witchcraft and the hope and the faith of the ancient era. They might as well go back to Ragnarok, you know? I mean, talk about craziness. But anyway, here is, let's see, this is a really interesting word. Plerophoria. Plerophoria. Plerophoria comes from pleo, which means to fill. Literally, it can mean to fulfill. If you see, I've got the notes, to fulfill, but to fill. And pharaoh means to bear. So this word, and in the context to bear, it comes from the word meaning to wear clothing. So when I bear, I'm wearing clothing. In other words, something that's attached to me or put on me. It means literally complete confidence. Fill or fulfill and bear. So to bear like clothing. To bear in fulfillment. To bear in fulfillment. And in Greek it means complete confidence. Entire confidence. So elpis means I have expectation. This is the next stage. This means I have absolute confidence. So this means I'm expecting it. This means it's coming, right? Really interesting word because it is a synonym to a degree, a kind of synonym for what we call, pisteo, to be convinced. I'm convinced it's going to happen, no matter what. And then finally, this word is so good, and it's actually almost correctly translated. O-N-M-E-N. Take the epithumia part. Epi. And in this case, epi means basically as a relation of superimposition or relation of distribution. So it can mean close, over, on, near, next to. And thumo literally means to breathe hard or blow smoke. It means to sacrifice. It means the scent of the sacrifice. Thumio is literally the scent of the sacrifice. And epi means literally the close or on the scent of the sacrifice. This is that word. This is that very, very complex and beautiful word in Greek that whenever I smell the scent, you ever notice? When the pastor lifts the veil over the elements, what do you smell if you're close enough? You smell the wine, right? You smell the wine. In the ancient world, when they started cooking, and by the way, it wasn't burning. The Hebrews burnt things. They did Holocaust offerings. But that's not the way you did sacrifices in the ancient world. You didn't burn things. You cooked them. So now you're smelling Chester's Chop House, right? When they're in the middle of dinner, cooking dinner. And what happens?
You get hungry.
You're salivating, the scent of the sacrifice. And in this case, and if you notice, the King James, covet, desire, would fain, lust. What terrible translations for this word. They have nothing to do with desire, that kind of desire. They have nothing to do with coveting. They have everything to do with when you smell it, what does it bring to your mind immediately? What is it supposed to mean, bring to your mind in this context of Hebrews? What is the ultimate sacrifice? Jesus Christ. So when you smell the scent of the sacrifice, what do the early Christians want you to remember? Jesus Christ. You're taking from the Greek cultures and other cultures, you're absconding with their elements, with their thing. Today, like I said, when you lift the veil and you smell the wine, that is the scent of the sacrifice. It's the same kind of idea. It's the same kind of concept. Don't you long for it? When you smell it, you go, yeah, I'm going to commune. And depending on how great, deep your spiritual awareness may be or may not be. I mean, some people just go, they take the bread and they take the elements. It's like, okay, I'm here, right? But to me, it's a very deep thing. And I think that's the point, right? You're celebrating with the deity. You're celebrating the Thanksgiving sacrifice. I mean, talk about deep stuff. Anyway, so with these in mind, and these words come right out of, let me see, I got to get it right here, 11. So I don't want to go over the other things. I'm trying to get smarter about how to do this, and I finally got to my notes where I got more smarter-ish, because I put the King James and the NIV together and tried to fix them so that we have a full understanding. Here, Hebrews 6:11, it says, "And we desire that every one of you do show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope unto the end." Here's the words in the Greek. If you already are noticing, we should have these words. But is actually, okay, well, let's say, we want epithumio. We want epithumio. We want what? We want you to smell the scent of the sacrifice. Yeah, we want the scent of the sacrifice. Each of you to literally indikamunai, indicate by word or act. Indicate by word or act. This same dispatch, spuda. They say diligence, that's okay. To the very end, that's added, plerophoria, to carry out fully in evidence. Basically, to have absolute, complete confidence that it will happen. in order to make yours added, literally it says expectation, elpis. So, it used the word pleraphoria, right? The point is that the scent of the sacrifice should indicate to you absolutely that it's not elpis, it's an expectation that has been fulfilled, completed. Because what already happened?
Christ has already died and rose.
Risen.
Yeah, you don't, in other words, I mean, this is deep stuff, right? But what he's saying is, you don't have to worry. We have, I hate to do this, but we have to go back to all the other, remember the other books that we studied? And I told you that Paul and the writers, did they encourage them to separate themselves from the other pagans and from the people?
No.
The exact opposite, right? In fact, we did get some separations later, right? In, I think, James and, is it Philippians? Anyway, where it talks about, don't listen to idle philosophies and other things like that. But you don't get any of that from the early documents, especially Pauline documents. All the Pauline letters, they say, what should you do? You should...
Go mix it up and transform the culture.
Yeah, mix it up. As a matter of fact, when we looked at, I think, 2 Thessalonians, we saw in 2 Thessalonians, there was a message, a direct message, to make festivals like they do, to attend the festivals, right? Just when you go to the festivals, you are not worshiping their gods, you're worshiping the God. And that goes along with what Paul said, right? Paul told the Greeks, let me tell you about the unknown God, right? He didn't tell you, he didn't say to them, forget your other gods. He didn't say, let me tell you about the only God, right? He said, let me tell you about the unknown God that created the universe, right? And that goes back to what you said, remember? Who created in the Greek structure? No, in the Greek structure. Huh? Nobody did. The Greeks, this is a constant question to the Greeks and to the Greek gods and goddesses. Who created? The Titans didn't create. The Titans existed to begin with. And then the Titans basically had sex, and that created the other Titans. And the gods that were born of the head Titan, I think Uranus or whatever, basically he created through sexual activity the other gods and goddesses of the mythic, the regular pantheon, right? Which is really interesting. Guess what we got? Animism. You start with animism and you have the Titans, and then you have the pantheonic paganism, and guess what? You killed off your Titans, and now you have the pantheon. Isn't that interesting? Guess who was left? There's only one god left in the whole of the Titans that was part of the Greek pantheon. Hestia. Hestia is where we get Easter. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, the primary goddess in all Greek theology. Hestia is the one that every day, before you went to bed, the person who took care of the fire would write an omega. And then in the morning, on the hearth, they would write an alpha. Every Greek hearth on it had an alpha and an omega. So when it's written about Jesus, he is the alpha and the omega. He's the beginning of the day, he's the end of the day. He's the beginning of creation, he's the end of creation. Every Greek baby knew this. Because guess what the Greek kids were supposed to learn to do very early in their life?
Fire in the morning.
Never let it die. You know what he had to do if the fire died? You couldn't start it. If you started, they'd kill you. You had to go to the temple. You had to go get your fire from the temple. The temple got their fire from Olympus. The fire was made in Olympus, usually they had a shield. They did it. You guys have seen an Olympic thing, right? What do? They take this shield and they aim it in the concave and they light a torch, right? Those torches were lit from, Helios. Not even Zeus, was it? But guess what was lit? It was lit at the hearth of Zeus, where Hestia was the goddess of the hearth. Hestia is the most important goddess in all of Greek mythology. Guess what? There's one poem and one or two myths about Hestia. Remember what I've told you? What do you not write about?
Things everyone knows.
The thing that is most common. You write about the uncommon, that's what you put down in literature or in writing. Hestia was the most common. Everyone knew Hestia because you gave every libation in Greek. And this is really important stuff because if you want to think like a Greek, every libation, remember you know what a libation is, right? Remember, we're going to talk about it. There is talk about libations in this. A libation is where you drop a bit of wine or drink, usually wine, to the god. But guess what god always got the first libation? Hestia. Guess what god got the first sacrifice? Hestia. Hestia was the goddess of hearth, the most important goddess there was. She didn't have great powers, but her great powers were happiness in the home, happiness of brides, happiness in the councils, happiness at the hearth. She named everyone. She knew the names of every created being. This is pretty deep stuff. I mean, who did you want? What would you, okay, I'm going to war, right? No, what do you really want?
Stay home and be happy.
Happiness at home, yeah, whatever happens, I want happiness. Anyway, okay. But we want to carry out fully in order to make, and this is your elpis, sure, until the terminus telos. Arche. I didn't give you this word, I probably should, but it's a really interesting word. A-C-H-R-I. Literally, until the terminus. Until the terminus telos. Until the end telos. Until the terminus telos. So let's see that again. But we want literally the scent of the sacrifice for each of you to indicate by word or act the dispatch to carry out in evidence the elpis, the expectation until the terminus telos, the ending telos. This is beautiful stuff. In the Hebrew, I'll read the Hebrew again. I'll read it to you in the King James. And we desire that every one of you do show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope unto the end. You know, when we read it in the English, it's just, let me see, here's my translation. But we set our hearts upon the scent of the sacrifice, each of you to indicate by word or act this same dispatch, to carry out fully in evidence with expectation until the terminus telos, the point aimed at as a limit. The point you are aiming at. What are you aiming at? On the earth you want to be, well, we'll expand. On earth, the point, what do you want to be like? Like Christ. I want to be like Christ because I want to have agape, right? I want to be like Christ, be like the gods. Because I am now an adopted member of the Godhead, right? Through Jesus Christ. I want to be like Christ. And what's the end terminus after that?
That's eternal life.
Yeah, I want to go to heaven. I mean, I don't want this Hindu idea to be reincarnated to nothing, right? That's kind of yucky. I don't want to be like Greek and be in Hades, even in the Elysian fields. That doesn't sound like a lot of positive to me, being underground like in Hades, right? I don't want to be how about the Hebrews? You want to go to Hades or Gehenna? Right? I mean, that's really a positive place, right? Yes, sir.
So the end terminus, you drew before the logos to telos, and the vanishing point on the horizon will always change as your perspective changes.
Mm-hmm.
You go up on a hill, you can see farther down the horizon.
Yep.
And so does the end terminus mean at that point where it doesn't change, that is the answer?
Yes, and that's the point of this arche, the terminus telos. The telos is not slippery. We have in our mind, and I would like you to think of it more slippery than a conclusion, because it is the conclusion that you have made to the logical argument. And we know that a good Greek would say that probably the Greek would say this, okay? As the logical argument starts, what does the telos look like when the argument starts?
Could be one
Many
thing.
possible things.
Yeah, many possibles, right? When it starts. But then as the argument progresses, what happens?
The possibilities narrow.
Focuses.
The limit becomes a singularity, right? So that if you have a singular telos, you have a parable, right? A parabola, right? It touches the axis at one point. A terminus telos is exactly what you're expressing. The terminus telos means the end telos. And of course, this is, okay, the Greeks, this is what the Greeks talked about all the time.
That they strive for.
Well, not necessarily strive for, but what is the telos? What is the terminus telos? Right? What is what is the initial telos of the universe? The telic cause of the universe. Even in modern scientific thought.
Big
The-
Bang.
The Big Bang, which was caused obviously by,
Quantum singularity.
well, no, we don't know. Hawking thinks it was caused by a future race or a super race and it reoccurred, right? And there was a super race, and the telic cause, it can't be a quantum singularity because, wait a second, a quantum singularity, if that's so,
But
that,
then who makes that exist?
well, how can you have a quantum singularity in a universe that is non-existent?
Right.
Oh my goodness gracious, what have we got? The only thing you can point to is
God.
God. Now, if you're God, you want your God to be like Hawking's, like a superior race that existed?
What's
Okay,
the
well, who
cause of
created
that?
them?
What's the cause of
Yeah.
that?
Well, what he just did is he went just back to the Titans in animism, right? It just existed. It just existed, and it just blew. It just blew, right? The hatch just blew. It wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. So, I mean, this is really funny. I mean, watching them squirm is even more hilarious. What is the terminus? And see, the Greeks wanted to talk about this all the time. If the Greeks, the Christians gave us great hope. Because if God exists in the plenum of everything, okay, so you have God in the plenum of everything that is unbounded. It's unlimited, right? And then God created the cosmos. This is the cosmos. Cosmos, what he created. And then you have within it philosophia, that which man can know. And then within that you have the creation, or the world, the absolute world of it, that you can perceive. Right? So, if all the cosmos goes away, what do I still have?
The world, you got God.
I have the plenum of everything with God in it, right? Is that good or bad? Well, I would think it's good because, I mean, that's certainly much better than Nirvana of nothing, right? Or Gehenna, or, even the Elysian fields in Hades. I mean, I'm just saying. But the point is, the Greeks were always looking, what is the terminus? And even so, well, what is, okay, I hate to do this, but all right, what is John's Revelation say? Right now, the heavens and the earth are together. That's what Jesus said. A new heaven and new earth. So in other words, according to the New Testament, will the cosmos go away?
Yes, the one we can see.
The one we perceive, but it'll be a new heaven and a new earth, which means the cosmos still exists. So even the hope, the Greeks were always asking, will the terminus be the end of the universe? That's what Stephen Hawking wants to know. Will it stop and come back to him? And he won't be there anyway, but it's okay. I'm just saying, it's ludicrous. The atheist viewpoint and the agnostic viewpoint is not only irrational and craziness, but they start to go wacko when they start to try to look at things that are way outside their sphere. And plus, Immanuel Kant already proved there was God. I mean, the fact that he hasn't read Immanuel Kant says something about his educational sphere too, or he just rejected it because he couldn't understand it, which may be true. In any
Why
case,
would the Greeks use that word for God? When everything else is gone, all that exists is God.
Actually, they do. The telecause, according to the Greeks, is God. As a matter of the telecause, okay, I'll throw this in because this is a great bomb that's really fun. But if you guys were taught by a proper professor who's teaching you Greek literature, matter of fact, for all literature, modern literature, for all literature, what do you have to have? You have to have a protagonist, an antagonist, and a telecause. The telecause in the Greek, all Greek literature and all Greek plays was a god. Always, because you were fated. The telecause in other things today are, like for example, a detective novel, it's the crime. That's the telecause that the protagonist must discover. But in all Greek literature, the telecause was always a god. So if you want a secret, when you read in Greek literature about a telic terminus or a telic beginning, I don't know, I can't remember what the word is for beginning in Greek, but for the telic beginning or the telic end, the cause is always a god, period.
So was the unknown God that Paul is talking about the one who created the universe, the one they didn't know?
Yes, and that's what he says. Remember, he says...
Not just a God that we think might be out there and we just want to make sure we cover our bases, but like the telic God.
Yes. See, this, if you go back and you look at, and I didn't give I gave many complete translations in the second mission of the arguments. And there are a couple, one of the big arguments in there, it's not the credo, I don't think, but it's, I have to go back and review my own writing. But there's one of the arguments in there is about the beginning of the earth and the end of the earth. And it talks about the gods. And the biggest problem they have is the gods did not create.
Who created them?
Yes, and that is a continual question the Greeks had. What is the telic cause of the universe, and what is the terminus of the universe? See, what happened was their intellect outran their myths. And that, you see it in the Socratic dialogues, you see it in their writing.
How did the, and I know they knew nothing about Pavlov, but how does Pavlovian theory rationalize with epithumia? When does it go from conditioning, because that's what the set of the sacrifice, you're conditioned to have this feeling, to a spiritual? I mean, how did the Greeks rationalize a physical feeling or reaction to a spirit? Did the Greeks believe in a soul?
Yeah, they did. Remember Sarksuke and Pneuma?
Right,
That
but
is...
how did they, when Paul is writing in Greek, how is he saying that we need to be conditioned and eventually will understand spiritually?
You know what? You have asked a $100 wonderful question, because I think that we can kind of answer that if we think about Greek culture very easily. Because the Greeks, remember, in the Greek worldview, they stole the word cardia from the Romans. Cardia comes from the Romans. But if you remember, they viewed, for example, in the concept of suke, they believed that suke, like if I felt, the word passion. The word passion to the Greeks meant an uncontrollable reaction. To them, passion was part of the thinking process. Paul kept telling them to use your suke and pneuma to do what?
Control your passion.
To control your passion, because the Greek worldview would say, no, you can't, it's fated, right? So what we have here is we have a dichotomy in culture that is, we have the Christian culture that is catching up with the Greek culture, and you can see where it comes from. It's not a clash of cultures because they didn't make it a clash of cultures. In the Hebrew culture, you do what? You control yourself, right? In the Greek culture, you do what?
Go with it.
You act on it and go with it. The only reason you have strictures and control is because of whatever cultural strictures there happens to be. So you don't rape your neighbor's wife unless you find her in the street. But you might rape your neighbor's slave if you find her in the street, right? Because that's their culture. If you feel a passion, you act on the passion. if you have epithumia, the Greeks would say it doesn't matter. The Greeks would say purely, it doesn't matter whether you have any spiritual feeling. It's a direct essence from the gods that is fated. You are fated to have that feeling. Paul would say, though, what? What you just said. Paul would say, yeah, you have epithumia because your passion, right? The reaction of your cardia, your spirit. But then what would he say?
Use that
Direct it, right? Direct it to what?
to bringing more people to Christ.
Well, or to Christ. Like, so for example, they're having a festival to Artemis. It's a festival to Artemis or Demeter, right? And they're having sacrifices. And it's so good. There's meat. I'm eating meat with oysters. I think that was really good. I think I had steak with oysters on top. I never had it before. It's really good. So you got steak with oysters on top. It's like, oh, this is epithumia, right? But Paul would say, you're going to a festival for Artemis, but what do? You focus your spiritual feeling and your desire not to Artemis, but to the God, right? To Christ. That's the point. That's how you control your passions and desires. And by the way, eventually what we know happened was the Christians said, well, look, we've set up a carnival over here for your kids and for you and your wife. You can bring your slaves and your wife and your kids, and we have a little carnival here. And guess what? You're safe from molesters, and we've got people guarding and protecting you. You know, we're going to keep people from drinking too much. You know, drinking a little bit's great. That's Greek, right? But you're not going to drink too much, right? So by looking at the values of the Greek society, and then they bring them in and they say, oh, we're doing a celebration to light. And the Greeks said, oh, that's cool. I like that. And guess what? We have a mysterion. And they say, well, how do we remember? How do you be a member? Well, you got to be baptized, you know. And they're going, well, you got to be baptized for the Mithrin mysterion too. And they said, we'll tell you the mystery right away. They go, you mean I don't have to spend 30 years, you know, learning about the mysteries? And they go, no. Christ has died. Christ has risen. Christ has died. Christ has risen. Yeah, I heard about that guy, right? He was the guy that the Romans crucified, right, in Jerusalem. And yeah, I heard. Did he really rise? Is that what really happened? Oh yeah, there's 500 people that saw it, and I saw it. You hear, this guy right here, he was in Jerusalem at the time, and this person knew somebody from Jerusalem at the time. And you know, Paul every now and then comes through here. It happens to be Ephesus, right? Demeter, you know, remember Artemis? Hey.
Demeter is Harry Potter.
Or not Demeter. What's her name? Demeter. Sorry, Demeter, not Demeter. Dementors are those. Well, you know, you wouldn't have stole it, right? But anyway, so Artemis, yeah, we had the celebration of Artemis. But Paul's been through here. I saw Paul. You see what I'm saying? I mean, this stuff, you can't make it up. I mean, this is so beautiful, the way that it happened. Today, of course, we kind of do the opposite, right? We kind of separate ourselves into our own little folds, and oh, God forbid, don't go there, don't do that, don't, you know, you can't have those. Don't read Harry Potter books. Don't read this, don't read that. Paul said, read everything. It'll help you. Anyway, 12. We don't want is added. Let's see, and I didn't give myself a thing. We don't want is added. It says it is not hina, it's hiname. So that not, the two is added, that not become sluggish. Lazy is okay. Notros. But to imitate, to be imitators, those who clara nomeo, errs by law, through persuasion, through pistis, patience, and macrothumia. All right, macrothumia. Macrothumia. Thumia means the scent of the sacrifice.
On steroids is what he said.
Yeah, it is. It's what it literally means. This is a beautiful word. It literally means the length of the line of the scent of the sacrifice to God. So when I cooked my I didn't burn it. When I cooked it, right? Now, when you burned it, the Holocaust, it's about the same thing, but it doesn't smell good. Just saying. But when I cook, yeah, you ladies know, or you guys do, you burn a steak. Don't burn your steaks, please. That's a crime. Anyway, so when the scent of the sacrifice is going up, right, and you smell the scent, the macrothumia is that line. And you ever wonder why they got the imagery? Because when they cooked it, right, it made, and the problem with the Greeks, or not the Greeks, the Hebrews, what did the Hebrews do with their sacrifices that they ate? The Thanksgiving sacrifice, what did they do? They boiled it. Oh! Oh!
Why did you do that to good?
They boiled it, okay? Remember, what did they do with the Passover sacrifice? They roasted it. They roasted the Passover sacrifice. You know, I don't want to say they got it wrong, but I think there was a misunderstanding here between what God really intended and the way they kind of played it out. Why was boiling such a big deal in their era?
The blood.
Huh?
The blood.
Well, not so much the blood. There's a huge thing here. What could you not do at home? The Passover is roasted because you can. Did people have vessels? Right? Anyway,
No class next week.
no class next week. But, you know, we are getting into some really neat stuff. You know, this is just, to me, the most exciting thing that we can imagine, because we are talking about stuff culturally that is so important to the Greeks and to us, because we are trying to understand this stuff, right? And to me, I don't know, I get so excited about this because I think it's really neat stuff. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen. And I'll give you the information.